U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Ethiopia earlier this week after years of strained relations caused by the conflict within the country. Blinken met with his Ethiopian counterpart, Demeke Mekonnen, in Addis Abeba. The trip is part of a push by Washington to support peace efforts in the country after 2 years of civil war in the Tigray region. The U.S. Secretary lauded the two parties for their peace efforts.
Cessation of hostilities agreement is a major achievement and step forward, saving lives, changing lives. The guns are silent. As the fighting has stopped, human rights violations have declined. Humanitarian assistance is flowing and finally reaching nearly all communities in need. Services are being restored in the Tigray region. The TPLF is disarming. Eritrean and other non-federal forces are departing. Prime Minister Abiy and the Ethiopian federal government and Tigrayan regional leaders should be commended for reaching this agreement and for the significant progress in delivering on their commitments.
Now, this comes amid report of a large-scale massacre in Tigray just days before the peace deal was signed last November. Witnesses say more than 300 people were massacred in villages around the town of Adwa in Tigray. The killings were in apparent retaliation for a battlefield defeat inflicted by the Tigray Liberation Front on Eritrean forces who were fighting on the side of Ethiopian government troops. Now, rights groups have accused Eritrean soldiers of frequent mass killings, systematic rape, and sexual slavery during the brutal 2-year war. DW gained access to the region to hear from survivors. A warning, you may find the following report upsetting.
Abrahad Hagos survived a massacre where more than 300 villagers were killed. It happened just days before a deal was signed, ending the war in Tigray. She had heard rumors of people being killed, so she and her family went into hiding near her house.
When the cattle started making noises, my son and husband left for the house to see what was happening. Then a soldier came and killed them both.
She heard shots being fired. It was an Eritrean soldier, she says. Here's where he shot the door. Inside her hut, she found a bloodbath. Her husband, 70-year-old Berihu Abai, shot dead on the floor, holding his cross under his head. He had been a priest.
I told my daughter, "Your father is dead." We carried him into the living room. There we found my son, also dead. We were shocked. We covered them and cried.
Her 28-year-old son, Gidey Birihu, had been planning to marry soon. Abrahad Hagos and her daughter were too scared of the soldiers who were occupying the village. They stayed in the house with the bodies for 4 days.
Then I went to the church to see if I could bury them there, but a high-ranking Eritrean soldier said no. He said it was us who attacked them. I told him we didn't.
She buried her husband and son in her backyard. After 2 months, they were finally moved to the church's graveyard. Since then, Abrahad Hagos hasn't slept well. She's overcome with grief.
What did we Tigrayans do? They must be held accountable. It was civilians they killed. They killed the people instead of fighting the soldiers.
According to the administration of the town of Adwa, the soldiers slaughtered more than 300 people in various villages over the course of just 1 week. Witnesses say Eritrean forces took revenge on civilians after suffering a defeat on the battlefield. Atseda Abai, a social worker, recorded 91 people who were killed in the village of Mariam Shevitu over 3 days.
Of the 91 victims, 12 were women. 10 were religious leaders. When we looked at the ages, they were from 2 years to 92 years old.
They killed toddlers, little girls, entire families. Often the soldiers tied their victims' hands before executing them. In one case, both parents were murdered in front of their 5 children.
They killed the mother, named Sige, and mutilated her breasts with a knife. After they killed her, they put the baby on top of her.
These findings are a testament to the gruesome violence that happened here. Addis Abeba hopes that her records will one day help justice to be served.
For some more analysis, I'm now joined by Addis Abeba, Senior Advisor for Constitution and Peace Building at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance in The Hague, the Netherlands. Hello, Adam. Is there any chance at all that victims of the conflict will get justice?
Thank you again for having me. There is certainly a political understanding that the violence that happened in connection with the civil war, but also the violence that has happened before the civil war started, that justice is necessary to address the violence then. Now, in terms of how to go about it, the kind of justice, all of that is still very open. And of course, there are also questions around the intention of the stakeholders, and not just the government, but also the officials of the Tigrayan Liberation Front, because violence has been committed on all sides. And so there are questions around the intention and also questions around the capacity to deliver, even if there is willingness.
I mean, you mentioned violence has been committed on all sides and from all sides. Eritrean soldiers who were aligned to the Ethiopian government during the war are also accused of horrific acts of violence. So could they really face justice?
That is very complicated because Eritrea is an independent country, and any process that happens within Ethiopia would very likely be restricted to Ethiopians, to the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan leadership. And so Eritrea kind of represents a unique and very difficult situation. And if there is to be accountability against Eritreans that are responsible for atrocities, that would have to be more international. It would not be possible for the Ethiopian government alone to impose any sanctions. And so, and internationally, it's obviously a very difficult, very complicated process. And so, unfortunately, I suspect it's going to be a lot more difficult to hold the Eritreans accountable at this stage.
That will clearly be a big challenge to the people that are seeking justice. Talking about, opening it up to an international, say, committee maybe to try to seek justice. Ethiopia is pushing for a local legal process. It has objected to a UN Commission of Inquiry. But why not allow an independent body to help seek justice? Wouldn't that be the best deal?
Well, so you're right. The United Nations Human Rights Council has set up a committee investigating atrocities connected with the civil war. Now, the Ethiopian government obviously has been against it, partly because the committee was set up at a moment where the war was still raging. And so there was a sense that the council was being used by unfriendly countries to push its agenda in relation to the war. And so there is that baggage that comes with it. And secondly, the mandate of the commission is restricted to the civil war. But what the Ethiopian government now is proposing, and again, as I said initially, their intentions and the capacity, there are questions around those. But the intention is to look beyond, not just at the civil war, but beyond, to include issues of justice that have been arising in the past decade or two. And of course, more fundamentally, the Ethiopian government thinks that justice is a matter of sovereignty for the country, and therefore it wants to have control.
How feasible is that? I mean, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Ethiopia just recently. What will the U.S. role in all of this help to achieve?
Well, so, the situation is very complicated. The country is still in transition. It's very delicate, very fragile. And so questions around justice obviously have implications to questions around peace and democracy and all of that. And so internally, political willingness to proceed with these things will depend on the power dynamics. And the international community, naturally, because of its leverage over the economy, because of its control over the World Bank, and other budget and diplomatic support to the Ethiopian government, they have some leverage in guiding the approach that the Ethiopian government takes. But overall, the primary responsibility remains with the Ethiopian government, but the international pressure can certainly shape the measures that the Ethiopian government takes. But because the country is still in transition, and because the situation, as big as it was, the civil war is essentially part of the dynamics, part of the complexities that the country faces. And so we have to see how productively the international community, particularly the West, can engage. But the primary responsibility would depend on the Ethiopian government, and in that in turn depends on the ongoing political dynamics within the country.
Okay. Adam Kasiabebe with the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance in The Hague, Netherlands. Thank you.